Thank you for waiting till I took the mask off. Hey folks, how we doing? Look at that. I'd try to whistle, but I'm terrible at it. So I'm going to start with a quick apology. I picked something up on a trip to California this past week. So I'm going to take off my mask just to do this, and then I'm going to put it back on, and I'm going to do the intro, but the great and wonderful Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, Alex Piles, reporter and editor in his own right, will do the Q&A so I don't share things I shouldn't share. So with that said, thank you for joining us this afternoon as we honor and learn from the 2025 winners of the Maria Ressa Prizes for Courage in Journalism. These 4 annual awards are central to Merrill College's press freedom mission. The awards are named for Maria Ressa, the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize winner and acclaimed champion of global press freedom. Thank you to First Look Institute for making these awards possible. As co-founder and CEO of Rappler, the top digital-only news site leading the fight for press freedom in the Philippines, Maria has endured constant political harassment and arrests and been forced to post bail at least 10 times in order to stay free. At a time when journalism and democracy itself are under assault, she is an acclaimed global champion of press freedom and stands as a beacon, an example of the kind of courage required to hold the most powerful in our society to account. We hope this prize will help to amplify that courage and be a beacon to other courageous journalists. This year's honorees include a documentarian who was imprisoned and tortured for flying a drone, journalists amplifying truth amid a wave of conspiracy theories that affected the Haitian community during the 2024 presidential election, a network and collaboration that every year seems to do a more courageous and amazing project, and students who stood up to power at their universities to report on campus protests about the war in Gaza. And the courage they displayed to simply practice journalism is impressive, and Merrill College is proud to recognize these models of our profession. Maria Ressa could not, unfortunately, be with us today. She has a really busy schedule. But she sent a message that I'd like to play real quick before we move on.
I'm Maria Ressa. It's such an honor to welcome you this afternoon to these awards. When they were created in my name, I understood it as something larger than any one person. It represents a commitment to a simple but increasingly dangerous ideal, that truth matters and that someone must be willing to tell it. When I spoke at the United Nations General Assembly, I shared a fact that still takes my breath away, that we are living through the deadliest period for journalists in recorded history. More than 240 journalists killed in Gaza alone, more than died in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and the former Yugoslavia combined. This is unprecedented. Journalists are being targeted and killed, and we must demand accountability. And yet, here we are. In the face of that violence, in the face of intimidation, imprisonment, and death, journalists continue to do our jobs. You continue to do your work. The awards we present today honor those who practice journalism as an act of courage. Some of you have faced imprisonment and torture. Some of you have stood against waves of disinformation targeting vulnerable communities. Some of you have exposed corruption at the highest levels of power. Some of you are students who refuse to be silent. while covering protests on your own campuses. Each of you understood something fundamental, that silence is complicity and that bearing witness, even at great personal cost, that mission of journalism is a choice we make every single day. The world needs your courage now more than ever. Democracy depends on it. Truth depends on it. The vulnerable communities who depend on your reporting to amplify their voices, they depend on it. When we honor you today, we're not just celebrating your past work, we're investigating in the future of journalism. We're saying to every journalist facing threats, facing censorship, facing violence, you are not alone. We see you. Your courage matters. Thank you to the Philip Merrill College of Journalism, its dedicated faculty, and Jim Risen for their unwavering commitment to press freedom and for making these awards possible. Your support means everything to journalists around the world who need to know that we're not alone. To this year's honorees, thank you for showing us what it means to hold the line. Thank you for refusing to look away. Thank you for your courage. Congratulations.
Thank you, Maria. The Maria Ressa Prize is awarded each year to the individual journalist or news organization anywhere in the world that exhibits journalistic courage in the face of serious threats from governments or other powerful forces. Our 2025 prize for courage in journalism is awarded to Shin Da-wei, a documentarian imprisoned in Myanmar. Presenting the award is Merrill College professor Dana Priest. Dana is a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner whose reporting courage brought us incredible stories, including uncovering secret CIA prisons around the world. Her work at Merrill College has shined a light on imprisoned journalists across the globe, journalists who embody the very courage we're here to recognize today. Dana?
Thank you, Dean Lorente. Well, I have to give you a little context for this. In 2011, a rare and very exciting, amazing event happened halfway around the world. In the country known as Burma at the time. And what happened was a military junta that had isolated its country like North Korea, dissolved almost completely. And the pro-democracy, courageous students and leaders like Aung San Suu Kyi at the time took over. And 1,000 flowers bloomed. People who had no access to the news overnight got it through the wily efforts of Facebook that just got in there, gave people free phones and free internet, and allowed them to see what was happening in the world. Political prisoners were freed, hundreds, or if not thousands of them, and people could speak their minds for the first time in 50 years without being worried about being killed or imprisoned or beaten up. Some of these people decided to become journalists, even though most of them didn't know what that was because they hadn't had journalism in their country. And for the ones that were the best, the United States developed a program to help them learn the basics of journalism. And the best of them became reporters for Radio Free Asia, which was an expansion of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, in the former states of the Soviet Union. Well, at the same time, a young woman named Shin Da-wei had just graduated from school, had finished some internships in other countries, and was starting a career as a documentary filmmaker. And And over the next decade, she made a dozen films. And she gravitated towards subjects that always took her to the normal citizen in now called Myanmar, who was not well off and whose livelihood often suffered from the consequences of climate change. People whose villages had literally been flooded away from copper mines mined by international corporations. The last really significant story that she did was about the effects of climate change-induced erosion on a number of villages that had just been obliterated over time. And of course, nobody was trying to help them. Shortly after that story, the junta came back overnight again. And those 10 years of freedom were just gone. But, as you can imagine, people who had gotten a good whiff of it, including Shin, refused to stop doing what they were doing, but this time at real peril. She continued to try to make films, so the junta came back in 2021. And in 2023, she had decided to try some drone technology. She wasn't actually the first there. For a country that had lived in basically total blackout from the world, they were very eager to test new technologies, and she was one of them. And she had just purchased a small drone online, and was going to the Yangon railroad station to pick it up when a number of, I think like 15 police officers who must have been following her, but opened her bag and found the drone and immediately arrested and imprisoned her for unauthorized, unregistered use of a drone. And knowing who she was and what she had written about, she was also charged with supporting and being a terrorist, which is a typical charge, especially after 9/11 when the U.S. started using that term in very broad ways. But a typical way that authoritarian governments were silencing journalists by calling them terrorists and imprisoning them. So when she went into, by this time, her employer, Radio Free Asia, was not quite as strong as it had been before, and it had very little political credibility. It used to be that the foreign reporters who worked for outlets backed by the United States had an automatic kind of extra protection because arresting them would mean going against the United States. Well, by then, that didn't matter because the U.S. had also vastly decreased its support for press freedom around the world. And by the time that she was arrested, it didn't matter at all. In fact, RFA, Radio Free Asia, had become an outlawed organization in Myanmar and a lot of other U.S. allies. So she went to prison. Her relatives say that she was likely tortured. They saw stitches in various parts of her body, bruises on her, and she was sentenced to, she was tried in a secret military court. She had no legal representation, and predictably, she was imprisoned for life. For life. Earlier this year, the regime gave amnesty or partial amnesty to hundreds of political prisoners, including Shin, who got a reduced sentence to 15 years in prison, which is what she's under now. So for her efforts to continue to bring real news that affect real people's lives, she is our 2025 Maria Ressa winner. And having taught classes in imprisoned journalists, I know that it's not unusual for the prisoners to learn about these recognitions. And having talked to a couple of them who have since been freed, including Jason Razian, I know that these recognitions mean so much to them because they fear that they've been forgotten. And we want to tell them they have not. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. As I introduce the rest of the honorees, I ask each representative to please come forward for a photo with your award and to then take a seat on our panel at the front of the auditorium. And I'm going to ask you to take a photo with the much younger, better-looking Associate Dean, if that's okay.
Was younger.
The Maria Ressa Prize for Courage in Investigative Journalism honors reporting by any news organization or individual reporter in the United States that showed uncommon courage and required the journalists to stand up to powerful interests. The 2025 prize is awarded to the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. OCCRP, as it is known, has developed an impressive track record of taking on many of the most important and dangerous investigative reporting projects in the world. Working as a network of journalistic partners, it has sought to expose corruption at the highest level of power around the globe. The OCCRP's recent work includes its partnership with the Boston Globe for reporting on the financial mismanagement of a major hospital chain, a story which was a finalist for this year's Pulitzer Prize. Representing OCCRP is co-founder and publisher Drew Sullivan. The Maria Ressa Prize for Courage in Local or Independent Journalism recognizes courage displayed by small city newspapers, freelancers, or other journalists in the United States who have stood up to powerful forces despite an imbalance in resources. This year's winner is the Haitian Times, which covers the Haitian community in the United States. The Times bravely told the truth about the conspiracy theories amplified by then-candidate Donald Trump and others about Haitian refugees during the 2024 presidential campaign. Representing the Haitian Times is publisher and editor-in-chief Vanya Andre. The Maria Ressa Prize for Courage in Student Journalism honors student journalists in high school or college in the United States who exhibited courage and fought for press freedom while standing up to powerful forces. The 2025 prize is awarded to a collective of student journalists who stood up for press freedom by covering campus protests about the war in Gaza. Student journalists at Indiana University, Columbia University, and UCLA are recognized as representatives of all students around the country who covered student protests under enormous pressure. Today, we have representatives from Indiana and Columbia. Heather Chen, managing editor of the Columbia Daily Spectator, and Brianna Pace, visuals editor at the Indiana Daily Student. Finally, before I turn it over to Alex and we begin our panel, we also want to announce a special citation. A special citation for journalists and media worker who've died in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon while covering the war in the Middle East. Despite the deaths, courageous journalists have continued to report from that war zone and others. Without such reporting, governments and others would have no one watching and telling the stories that hold them accountable both today and in the eyes of history's judges.
Thank you, Dean Lorente. Thank you all for being here. Especially thank you to our winners. Congratulations again. Yeah, we can clap again, that's fine. So the way this will work, folks, is we've got about 45 minutes or so. I've got some questions for the winners. And the last 10 or 15 minutes, we'll open it up to the audience. So if you don't have any questions, start thinking now, especially if you're a student. So since we are at a university, I am going to start with the student winners. I hope that's okay. So, Heather and Brianna, covering protests around Gaza on campus required not just reporting skills, but courage. So what was the hardest moment you faced in your coverage, and how did you handle it? Whichever one of you would like to start.
I think the hardest part for me was, I'll never forget when the police, when I got a text when I was at my apartment that the state police were in our free speech meadow, and they were lined up and they would probably start arresting people any minute. And I got in my car and drove to campus, and then I just saw hundreds of campus and state police officers lined up, and they announced, take down your tents, or in 5 minutes we're going to start arresting people. And I remember them counting down the last minute, and then they started walking forward, and I was just like this is really happening. And then it was just like chaos from there, and trying to stick together with other reporters to stay safe.
I would say I had sort of a similar moment. Columbia's encampment went on for nearly 2 weeks, and for those of you who haven't been on Columbia's campus, the Morningside Heights campus at least, it is sort of a gated community within these few blocks. And on the night of April 30th, I watched as student protesters occupied Hamilton Hall, like they had in 1968. And I was actually a photographer there that night with a lot of other spectator reporters. And something that I realized was that the gates were closed and that there was nobody that was going to be able to come in to report except for us and maybe the New York Times reporter who had been sleeping at the radio station. And by the time we reached 6 a.m., that was the time for me to switch off on my shift and head out. And as I was getting ready to leave the campus, just because only students could get in at the time, we got this message that nobody was going to be allowed to come in anymore. And so I went to the library and I slept on a desk because I was so afraid that nobody was going to be there to cover it and to cover what we anticipated to be police brutality, which is what happened hours later when the NYPD came in. And so I think it just really says something about student journalists. We're there when the cameras nationally come, and we're also there in the moments where it's not flashy. And we have to watch it all, and we have to make sure people know what happens. Yeah.
Wow, yeah. Nothing flashy about sleeping on a desk, I guess, right? It's what we dream of when we go to journalism school. That's really great stories, both of you. In the free speech meadow, huh? Wow. Vanya, would you mind taking us through the Haitian Times coverage of the harmful conspiracy theories directed at Haitian immigrants in Ohio and beyond during the 2024 presidential election, and what it took to combat that misinformation campaign?
Sure. Thank you again for this honor. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. So this initially started back in August when our special projects editor had gotten wind of a few town halls in Alabama where they were circulating flyers, essentially spreading information, basically fear-mongering, right? Saying that there's this influx of Haitian immigrants that are coming into our community that are looking to wreak havoc, that are looking to take from folks, right, to displace them. That initial story that we published in August is really what kicked off all of the negative attention that we received. Fast forward a couple of weeks into September, this is where we see this rumor take root that Haitian immigrants were in Springfield eating folks' cats and dogs, and just completely preposterous. Within those first 2 weeks of those rumors spreading, our special projects editor had doubled her coverage. In response to that, we started receiving lots of hate mail, folks going to our social media accounts, posting vile comments under our stories, folks targeting us individually, finding our information online, getting emails into our general inboxes, our reporter inboxes. By the time the debate had come around, we were obviously very vigilant to see whether or not this would be repeated on a national stage, and it was. Within hours of the debate, we published a story again refuting all of these claims, and in response to that, within a day or so, we started to receive bomb threats. We had an event that we were supposed to have in Springfield in person that weekend that we had to cancel because of those threats. Our special projects editor, in the days following, she was swatted and doxxed. She has 2 young, small boys. You can imagine waking up on a Tuesday morning, I believe, and you see SWAT team in front of you. They had received notice that a woman had been killed in her home and her throat was slashed. One of the other, and I should, preface this by saying, although we had to cancel our in-person event in Springfield, we decided to still hold it, but instead we held it virtually. Folks that attended the event virtually, we recorded remotely, but we didn't allow guests to attend. One of our panelists leaving that event, she was followed. She also received an email saying that her son was going to be murdered and that they knew where her son went to school. And so by the time, I want to say about a week after the debate happened and this had arisen to a national stage, we were in a place where, to be really quite frank, a bit unsure of even what to do. This is not something that we've ever confronted. If anything, when we've had to think about reporter safety, it's typically for our team in Haiti. You know, these are conversations and methods that we had in place in order to deal with a reporter being followed by a gang, threats of intimidation for our team in Port-au-Prince. And so to be confronted with this type of I'm not even sure what to call it, to be confronted with this in the States completely upended us. We weren't really sure which way to go. And what really came in handy was that we had a network of journalist support organizations that really came in to help guide us throughout this moment that we really weren't prepared for.
I just have to ask, how's your staff doing now? That's a harrowing experience.
Much better. I will have to say that there are always some apprehensions in terms of what we're covering, whether or not we will byline stories. And again, we're constantly thinking about our team in Haiti, but then now also our team in the US. And so this is something that we had to take into consideration before, and it has impacted how we do coverage. There was one reporter that worked with us. She was a retired professor and retired reporter who decided to stop working with us. She said, you know, I'm too old for this, essentially. This is not what I signed up for. And she pulled back. And so it's had some impact on our reporting capability, but we're still managing.
Great. Thank you. Drew, your work has revealed corruption at the highest levels of government and business. What strategies help you and your team stay safe while pursuing those investigations?
So, in the 17 years OCCRP has been operating, really the situation has just grown almost yearly to get more and more extreme. And so we've been constantly changing the way we do things. The first thing is that we do is we have a 5-person security team now, which for a group of 160 journalists is pretty excessive, but part of it's digital security, which often presages physical attacks, but also physical security. And the first thing that we do is we investigate the threat. In order to figure out the risk, you have to know what the probability and the impact of an attack on you. So we report, who is capable, do they kill, when do they kill, how do they kill, why do they kill? And so we have a good understanding of who we're dealing with. And then the next stage is to really design, specific protocols for a story or a project. All threat vectors really depend on who it is that you're reporting. And they all have very different characteristics. And so we design very specific situations. We also give all our reporters, if they don't feel safe, no questions asked, they can depart with their families anywhere on earth at our cost. We'll pay for it all, they just go. So we set up a system that's really designed to be constantly aware of everything that's going around us, and then basically designing systems. And we're constantly, being attacked by, digitally by the Russian GRU and other state actors. Now the United States has, used some of the same tools that have been used by nasty governments in the past. The Israeli encryption software NSO group, we had 12 reporters who had been infected with that software. This is a really serious problem, so we're constantly monitoring. We have experts who can see if a phone, is bugged. We can inspect an office to see if it's bugged. And it takes a tremendous amount of time and effort, but the life of your reporters is really critical, and the sense of feeling safe is really critical as well, though you can never eliminate. And we take a different approach to things. We find threats is wonderful. I love a threat. We're not worried about the people who threaten you. We're worried about the people who don't threaten you. They just kill you. That's what you have to be. So we designed a system where all our reporters learn surveillance and counter surveillance so that they can identify when somebody might be, tailing them, because that's maybe the only information you get to know that you have a problem and that your life is in danger.
Is digital the biggest piece of this, or does it really depend on the situation?
Yeah, it's really the craft. It's really understanding. It's people recognizing situations. It's having your phones locked down, your systems locked down. It's people trained. So most of the attacks that have been against us have been against administrative people, not against journalists. So, you have to know where they look to try to get in and break you, and that's where you try to set up things.
Thanks, Drew. I'm going to ask you all some questions now. We'll probably circle back and ask you some specific questions about your work, but my fantastic colleague, Professor Dana Priest, told us about one award winner who isn't here with us this evening. So I want to ask the panel, and I can volunteer somebody, or you can volunteer yourself to take this first, but the threats faced by Shindawe and Myanmar are extreme and heartbreaking and all kinds of other terrible adjectives. What can journalists here in the U.S. do to support colleagues like her who are imprisoned or silenced abroad? Does anyone want to take that? Go, please.
So we've had we've had over a dozen journalists arrested, and we've had a few colleagues killed. And the best thing to do is complete their work, is to basically go out and look at the issue they were looking at and report on it as best you can. So you want to show people that if you stop one person, 10 more people will take their place and make it an issue.
Anybody else want to? Oh, go ahead.
Same thing I was going to echo is truth. The fact that there is such an emphasis and such effort to stop the truth is even reason to keep going.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, how can journalists protect themselves physically, legally, and mentally when facing intimidation or misinformation campaigns? from anyone, right?
I'm happy to take that. So we learned a lot of great tips last fall. I would say first and foremost is really being cognizant of your presence online, especially social media, refraining from publishing anything that may be identifying to you, right? So where you work, where you live. Other tips that we received was not essentially change your pattern, your habits, right? If someone is following you, they're going to be following your path every day. And so if you typically make a right when you leave your door, make a left. Try to be unpredictable in your habits. Some other things that we've taken steps at the Haitian Times is also protecting ourselves with liability insurance, because that is something that we are concerned about under this administration. It's not just threats from individual bad actors, but I don't think it's fanciful to think that we are on the radar of the administration. And so trying to think of legal protections that we can have in place. Part of this is also thinking, to be really frank, that all of our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted in terms of our books, anything and everything that could be used, that can be weaponized to target a publication. And then I would say also on top of that is just really being secure again on your digital presence. And so part of that is, removing any personal information. Prior to this, our reporters had their phone numbers listed under their author profiles. We've had everyone since move to Signal using encrypted messaging apps. So there are a few things that you can do individually, but then also up the chain in your organization that can help you systemically as well.
And another thing is, I don't think we think about the story when we think about safety enough. We basically edit the story to protect the journalist. When you're dealing with organized crime, which there's very specific things when you're writing in organized crime stories. Certain people are off limits in terms of family members or certain aspects. But you have to really craft the story in two ways. One, you have to be completely and utterly accurate. We have a big fact-checking system that goes over and reviews every single thing that goes into a story in detail, because you can't be wrong. The minute you're wrong, people think that it's been done on purpose. Secondly, you have to mitigate the harm when you're writing the story. And this is something American journalists don't think of a lot, but when you're working in a lot of these countries, you have to write. I'm not saying pulling punches. I'm not saying you don't tell the truth, but you can tell the truth in the right way to mitigate the harm.
What a great lesson. Oh,
I
please.
was going to say, as well, from the New York Times, there's a guide called How to Dox Yourself, and it teaches you how to find all the public information about you online. And from there are services, but also guides online about how to get that information taken down if possible. And something I think about as well as a student journalist, at a university where people are being taken by ICE or have been taken by ICE, is just considering your sources as well, and how to protect them in that reporting process too.
I would say some physical things that we did during the encampment. We always stuck together, was at least two people together. We all had media credentials that they didn't really mean anything. They were just from our organization to give us look a little more official. We had our student IDs down in the lanyards too. That way we could kind of identify ourselves as press. And just knowing also the laws in each state regarding being around police. In Indiana, it's you can be within 7 feet, or you have to be 7 feet away, something like that. It varies state by state. So just knowing things like that, I think, is really important.
I mean, this just all sounds so extraordinarily mentally taxing, right? Reporting is hard enough, yeah. Any suggestions on how to deal with that day to day?
I mean, it's a new world, and reporting is a different being than it was. And you just have to constantly be training staff and working with people and changing your methods for doing things. We work in 100 countries around the world, and it's different in every single country, so it's particularly complicated. But there's basic rules that you have to have in place, and it has to be the editors who take responsibility for it. And so, from a standpoint of a news organization, I tell my editor-in-chief, you are responsible for the safety of every single reporter in your organization, which makes her understand the gravity of the situation and then follow and protect the rules. If you can't do it without the organization doing it, and you can't, there's great organizations out there, CPJ and others, that all try to help. You can't outsource your security. You have to eventually do it yourself, because it is the editor who knows where the reporter is. They know what the reporter's doing. They know the story. That editor has to be responsible for that reporter, and that's an organizational change. And then once you get it down, it's easier because it just becomes part of the system.
We've also worked with the DART Center for trauma reporting. They've done a few trainings with us just about mental wellness, some other things we've instituted, for example, particularly last fall, having somebody that is removed from the Haitian Times monitor our inbox, right? Somebody else, so that way we are not re-experiencing that trauma while just checking our emails or cleaning up comments. And so that is something that we've been very intentional about. And I would say also just, letting our reporters know that they have the room to say, I'm not comfortable. I don't want to work on this story. We have a network of freelancers that we work with across the country for this very reason. And I would say particularly for us as a majority Black and immigrant-run organization, there are certain coverage areas where it does help, right, to have somebody that's not from the community go and cover something where one of our reporters may be more of a target.
That's the perfect segue, or actually answer to my next question. Vanya, I really wanted to know about yours and everyone else's on the panel thoughts on how you balance courage and responsibility and keeping folks safe. When do you say to someone, you shouldn't be working on this story, he should be working on this story? Any other stories about that you could share?
I think it's a completely personal decision. Everyone has different comfort levels in terms of what they're willing to be confronted with and deal with. And so we really just try to take it for a case-by-case basis. I will say that we work with tremendously courageous young reporters that really believe in what we do and they want to be at the heart of the story. But if there are any instances, and I would say, the only one that I can think about was the reporter that decided to stop working with us, right? And I completely understand that. She did end up coming to contribute again about 6-7 months later, but changed her lane of reporting. And so for us, it's a very individual, personal decision for all of the reporters. And for me, I try to lead with compassion and sympathy and understanding, and I'm ready to meet them wherever they are.
One of the biggest problems we have now is burnout. It's basically PTSD. These reporters are under stress for years, and it basically hits them after a period of time. So you really, as managers at an organization, have to plan for that. You have to prevent people from, doing the things that are going to put them in that position. You also have to stop cowboys. We have a lot of cowboys who think it's we have to go out and be brave, but they are a danger to themselves and to those around them. And so we basically have a no cowboy rule. And if I see a reporter, not protecting themselves, then I'll pull them out immediately. And so, because in the end, that's going to lead to, again, PTSD, and it's going to lead to long-term problems. So you really have to, we did a poor job. We've been doing organized crime and corruption in Eastern Europe. You can't pick a, more dangerous topic than that. And we had courageous reporters, but now, it's a problem. They're burned out. They have no hope of ever owning a home. Their pensions are gone. They're often living in countries they were not born in because we had more than 40 people who had to leave their country. So, they get to the end of their career, their 40s when they're supposed to be most productive, and they're increasingly in a situation where they could, end up, not as functional. So it really is something you have to work very hard on, and we're trying to catch up on years of allowing that to happen, but you have to protect them.
Drew, I think the no cowboy rule just made it into my orientation for next semester, so thanks. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say for students, I think it's important to lean on other reporters and editors. When I was in Chicago, with a couple other reporters who are actually the editors-in-chief of the IDS now. We were covering some protests that were happening at the DNC, and sometimes I think you just kind of get wrapped up in reporting. There was actually an encampment that we had stumbled on, we're reporting, and there were police there, and I just was behind the camera just trying to get photos, not even really thinking about where I was. And this is, more physical and literal, but Mia had to pull me back and be like, come back here. I think just being aware of where you are and leaning on other people is important.
Thank you. Brad, I'm going to come right back to you. So you may have heard late last week, Brianna's newspaper and Indiana University got into a little bit of a dispute that became quite public. And I'd like you to take some time to tell us about that if you'd like.
Yeah, so basically it really all culminated in what happened last week, but it's something that's been going on for a while. We've had our print paper being gradually reduced on editions further and further. Last fall, it was announced that we would only be doing special guides, like our homecoming guides, Big Ten sports guides, things like that. No more weekly newspaper. And then last week, which was also something that had been going on for a couple weeks, basically the university told us that they didn't want us to publish any news to go along with our homecoming guide. It was just going to be homecoming fluff. This is what's going on around campus for homecoming. Here's the parade last year, things like that. And our student media advisor, Jim, told the dean that he would not do that. He wouldn't tell us what we could and couldn't put in the newspaper. And because of that, they fired him. And then later that night, in response to all of our protests, they completely cut print media, which is totally, they can't do that. It's not outlined in the student media plan they created last fall, when they cut us down to special guides. It says we'd be doing special guides, not that print media would be completely going away. So,
What's next?
I have no idea. I know that even before Jim was fired last week, our editors-in-chief had already been talking to different lawyers and student media organizations. Mia told me that she was actually on the phone with a lawyer already when they got the news that Jim was fired. So, yeah.
What happened to the homecoming guide?
It was cut.
So nothing published last week.
It's online, if you want to look online, and you can see how it is losing us money, because they're in the online paper, the spots where we would have had ads which make us money are just black boxes that say this is advertising that we're losing because the media school wouldn't allow us to print.
I just happened to be at Indiana University last week. It's a very nice newspaper. It's the last one that you've published, right? And I'm sorry, but I have to take this opportunity to ask her to sign it. So. Thank you. It certainly takes courage to stand up to administrators and really anyone who's trying to block freedom of the press. Thank you. All right, folks, we just have a few more minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the crowd. But I have to ask our esteemed panelists here, our award winners, what makes you hopeful about the future of journalism? And I'll start with you, Drew.
We wouldn't be here if we're not optimists, right? As bad as we love to complain, but as bad as things get, we're all basically optimists as journalists. And so the fact that so many people have not left the industry, the fact that there are organizations starting almost on a daily basis. You don't see it in the United States, but there are a ton of small centers around the world. We worked with a newspaper in a new website, investigative website, the first ever in the Solomon Islands. And they did the first investigative story that's ever been done in the Solomon Islands by local reporters. And it made a gigantic stink when they found that the prime minister had a bunch of properties that nobody knew he had, and it was far outside the amount of money that he makes. And so, there's always places where things are getting better and growing. The United States is a really difficult place, and you guys are graduating at a time that it's going to be extremely difficult. But there's a lot of passion still in the industry, and there's a lot of good people that go into this industry, even though we're shrinking, that I have to believe we will continuously innovate and we will continuously find new ways to do things. And I know CCRP is going to be doing that. So,
Thank you. Vanya?
I would say for me, it's twofold. On one side, it's the reception that we get from our audience, our readers. They value our reporting. They thank us. They are very vocal about it. And so that personally keeps us as a newsroom going. And then I would also say it's our peers. I'm also a board member for Lion, the local independent online news publishers, and I am in community with a lot of other small local editors, local papers, local publishers that are all filled with intensely smart and passionate people that believe in what we all do and see even more reason for it right now in the political and social environment that we're in. So, being around those types of people is really energizing, and then also just to see how valued our reporting is for our community.
I think for me, I'm only 22, but I think some of the younger reporters really show it. Like last week, one of our photographers was talking to me about how worried and stressed she was about everything. I think just seeing how much they care, and she's only like 19. And also, I think the way that, similar to what you said, the way people come together and support each other, like I've received DMs and messages and emails from people who I don't even know over the last week saying they support us, and just our whole newsroom, the way that we've all come together in the last week. I think the way that our editors-in-chief said it last week is the best way to say it. Like, our newsroom has become a national news story, and it's just us and our friends. It's just us and our friends who we like to hang out with on the weekends, and we're all a national news story now, but they said there's no one that I'd rather do it with.
For me, I think there's a lot of these. I think we're in sort of a moment that can also be said very difficult for media. There are all these billionaire owners, right? But the worker-owned media collectives, like 404 Media, Hellgate in New York City, they make me really hopeful. The city of New York, which covers New York City, is another independent group, and they're really great. And yeah, it's just like seeing the way that journalists can come in together in all these new formations and do courageous reporting is what gives me hope.
Thank you all. Look, I've gotten to ask like way more questions than I thought I was going to get to when the day started. So this has been great, but I'm going to open it up to you. I do have more questions if you don't have any, but I bet some of you do. Yeah. Start with a student that I know. Yeah.
Through a lot of your reporting, there's been some pretty wild causers and perpetrators of harm, and in some of those stories, even from hearing right now, some of those people really evaded accountability. How do you deal with those things in the moment, and how does it affect you moving forward with more stories or continuations of those stories that were the originals?
Yeah, I mean, our job is to tell the truth and run, right? I mean, we can't control what's going to happen, and so, I kind of take a Buddhist view on it. In this is what I do, and this is what I can control, and this is what I can write about. And when something doesn't happen, it means that, hey, that's a good story, and I'm going to continue writing about it. And so, a lot of people accuse us of, focusing on them, and it's not that we're focusing. Everybody needs a hobby, and you're our hobby right now. And so, I think you can't get too caught up in that. All you can do is do your best to explain to the readers what's going on in their country and what they can do about it. and that's all you do. And if you do that, you will be successful in the long run. We don't have the power to change governments. You know, we have a number of times, but it's something that just happens. And the better the public consumes news and the better they understand what you're saying, the more successful things get over time. And I do believe right now, you know, people are confused by the disinformation that's out there. But people need to know how their world works. And they will keep coming back to us. And it's up to us to get more creative. The industry is stagnated. You know, we really are stagnated in many ways. We haven't used the new technologies. We haven't used the new innovations. You know, we have to be far more creative, and we can be far more impactful when we are.
Well, I have two student-related questions. The first is, two of my students have been interns at OCCRP and then moved into actual jobs there. So is that still available to students? Are you still?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We're still doing it. We're working on projects now.
What kind of jobs do you have for them? And both of them were in data. Well, let's see. Layla, I think, was helping to edit, maybe. But Karin.
Research, yeah.
Research, and Karin did research too. So is that mainly what?
Yeah, a lot of times we bring people on in research because that gives them a lot of background on the kind of information you need to get when you're a reporter. But we're working on, you know, we've been focusing more on international students, but we're revisiting a lot of what we do. I think there will be more opportunities coming up as long as large American organizations continue to fund us, which is the problem right now.
Right.
So.
And my other student question is, from your experience and the experience of others that faced retribution of some sort from their colleges or police or whatever, have student editors and reporters gotten together more to share their experience or to help one another when they go through things like that?
I know for me, this past week, there were a lot more people in the newsroom. Like, there's usually people in and out and sitting around, but it was, like, packed. And then last Friday, we have a weekly meeting, and it's a little, probably about this big. It was completely packed, full of people.
Yeah.
And then I do believe there's like a collective of college papers that is coming together.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's like an Ivy League newspapers EIC group chat, and I think I'm not in it, but I've heard about it, and I think that they support each other there too. But also, like, for me, a resource that's been super helpful is like FIRE and SBLC in supporting student newspapers, particularly during these times.
I want to quickly introduce Kevin. You want to raise your hand?
I mentioned to Dana, we've been talking. I've run some stuff with Mizzou. That was kind of a grant-funded relationship, but we're open to it. Particularly interested in Mandarin speakers.
Yeah.
Everybody's interested in Mandarin speakers.
And Kevin will hires in North America. We have not hired a lot in North America. It's all been foreign, but we will be doing more. We got a grant to hire some editors and reporters in North America, so we're going to be here in a bigger way going forward, and that will mean interns as well.
A quick follow-up to Dana's second question. How many students in the audience are a member of student media? So there you go. There's your people at the cocktail hour. Ijoma, you had a question.
Hi. So at every level that journalism is practiced, it can be dangerous, but not all newsrooms have the same resources to protect their journalists. Some smaller newsrooms cannot just make their journalists disappear when it gets really serious. So how do you think that local newsrooms, really small newsrooms, can protect their journalists in the face of threats and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. You know, you have to consider whether you should be doing certain stories. You know, I hate to say it that way, but, you know, we had our whole Kyrgyz partner completely either arrested or literally fleeing overnight. they took on really difficult stories, and you know that's what's going to happen when you do that. And so you have to decide what stories you can bear as an organization to provide the protection. It's not responsible to put your reporters in harm's way without providing them the protection. In the old days, it was, you know, the editor would say, just be careful out there, and that was the only advice you got, you know. And now it really is, you know, it's gotten so bad that you, especially internationally, where you have to, you know, do whatever you can and limit it to those reporters who are capable of handling those problems, and then limit the risk that you're doing and take on the parts of the story you can take on without taking on too much risk.
This is kind of for the student quantities, but as a journalist who covers a lot of on-campus protests, I'm always really worried about my sources, and I'm always really worried about protecting them. How do you kind of balance that with also getting a diverse source range of a lot of observers?
I would say my first thing is I think that there's sometimes an instinct to like push people, right? Like speak on the record. But I think we're in an unprecedented moment where it actually isn't safe, and sometimes it's not worth it, right? It's not worth it at the cost of someone literally being deported. So that's something that I consider, like how much do I want to push? But also I think starting, especially in this moment where there's really this chilling effect, starting with these off-the-record conversations, building up trust by like just showing up to meetings, not coming from it at like sort of necessarily like I'm trying to get a story immediately, but just building these relationships is the way that I typically go about it with student protesters and other vulnerable sources.
Yeah, I think building relationships is really important. When we were covering the encampment, we did have a problem of sources not wanting to talk to us, but then saying that we weren't like diverse enough and like sharing both sides of the story, and it was a real issue because we asked them if they wanted to go on the record. They said no. So I think if we had built those relationships beforehand and they had seen our faces before, they may have been a little more willing to talk.
Professor Steiner, you had a question.
I did, and like Alex, I kind of like the "Don't be a cowboy" motto. Actually, have kind of more of a cowgirl question. After cowwoman, right? And, after Laura Logan was raped in Tahrir Square, covering the political chaos in Cairo several years ago, it then came out, because her situation had been internationally televised, that lots of women who were covering conflict generally and war specifically had been sexually assaulted, but they didn't tell their editors because they suspected, not unreasonably, that if they told their editors, they would be pulled out, and they didn't want that to happen. So, and by the way, I was just involved with two colleagues in a study of Lebanese reporters who are either covering political crises from within Lebanon or covering it outside, who reported all kinds of stressors, some of which had to do with covering those situations or talking to sources whose recounting of it was traumatic. And it turns out most of the women that we interviewed also had been sexually assaulted at some point, but didn't tell their editors, essentially for the same reason. So my question is how you balance this notion of
you know, don't be a cowboy, and, you know, if you're not the right person to cover this, or we think you're in danger, we think you're unsafe, we're gonna suggest that you pull yourself out, or we're gonna take you out. How do you balance that with, someone who says, I don't care, I really want to do that, and I'm not putting other people in danger, yes, I'm at risk. Of course, you could be sexually assaulted walking down the campus here, so.
Yeah, I mean, we actually have a special program just for women journalists because of this issue. And when we're designing safety, it's built around, you know, some of these issues. That's a really difficult question because in some sense, you know, the person wants to be empowered to fight back against this. This is why they were raped. But rape is the most traumatic experience a woman can face, you know, and you know, there would be there would be a desire to pull the reporter out of that to make sure that they're safe, but then with the promise of going back, you know, to be able to finish off their work. But I guess, you know, I'd never heard that, and I was not aware that people wanted to stay and continue reporting, and so that will, I think, we'll have to think about that. But it's a really difficult issue because, you know, sometimes people are in a trauma situation, you know, may not make the best decisions for themselves, and so you have to consider that as well. And that's one that that is a good case study to look at. I don't have a good answer, I'm afraid.
All right, I have successfully negotiated one more question. Who wants it? Professor Risen.
I just was wondering, one of the issues that I had in my career was the way I thought large American news organizations dealt with investigative reporting was that they would protect reporters, their own reporters, but they really didn't care very much about sources.
Yeah.
They thought that sources were kind of disposable. And I always thought that, as an investigative reporter, it made me feel very guilty when I would try to get somebody to talk to me, knowing that hopefully that problem would never come to the point where they would get in trouble, but I always wondered what would happen to sources, because a lot of editors at large news organizations are very callous in their internal discussions about sources. And I was just wondering, it sounds like all of you have taken a very different view, that you try to take into account what will happen to the source. And that, to me, struck me as something very new in journalism and good, that I haven't heard from large American news organizations, at least in my 40 years of working in them. And so I was just wondering if you could talk about that. Do you think that there is a culture shift, an attitude shift in protecting sources as much as you protect your own reporters, or is that something unique to your own situations?
Yeah, this is, unfortunately, we have lost two sources. We had two sources who were murdered. In both cases, it was actually a partner organization we were working with, who acted in a way that led to their death. And, you know, when we looked back at those cases, we said, you know, we have to be more involved with what the partner is doing. It's a difficult situation. It's still the same way. They don't care about sources. They are still disposable in most of the media that we see. And what we've tried to do is when somebody's a whistleblower inside an organization, we immediately connect them to the Signals network. So they're our partners on this. And so we will do that before we elicit information from them. And Signals works with us to you know, help the source get information, be able to feel safe about giving the information to us. You know, so we don't want to lose the information, but we want to make sure the source is protected first. And I think that's what you have to do. And a lot of it is just is really educating, is setting a standard at the organization saying, we will protect sources, you know, and that's just not happening.
It's really interesting because in my experience, particularly at the New York Times, I think there was a divide between the reporters and the editors and management over how they viewed the responsibility of the news organization to protect sources.
Yeah, because the reporters working with them closely, they have more, and they realize that if, you know, they blow sources, then they're not going to get those sources, they're not going to get news sources, you know, but it's a really difficult situation.
Can I add something to that? Go ahead.
No, after you.
No,
I would say that I suspect that it's different for community organizations. So, for example, the Haitian Times, we are a part of the community that we're covering. So there are a lot of personal relationships that predate a reporter. And if, in fact, that's many of the reasons why we work with somebody, right? Because they have these established personal relationships that make sourcing and cultivating those relationships that much easier. And so for us, you know, I would say 60% of some of our coverage, particularly in New York, we know at least 1 degree of separation of that source. And so we take it very seriously, protecting our sources from a practical reason, but then also there are neighbors, there are friends, there are friends of friends. And so for us, we find it integral just in terms of our mission and how we show up in our community.
If I can add just to what Jim was saying, because we're in a point, I've been doing this for 40 years, I've never been to a point where we are today where simply reaching out to try to make a source can jeopardize your source's safety. So right now, Doge went in and got all the emails. We all presume that they have 10 years of our emails to everybody we've ever emailed at HSI or State Department, et cetera. At this point, if you cold call someone and you reach out to an undersecretary for the Western, you know, Kazakhstan or something, you know, you're going to put them at risk internally because people are going to assume that you've reached out to them, they've had a relationship with your own. See, for the first time in my life, I've actually had to think about how I reach out to a potential source, and that's really a place we haven't been as a nation before. LinkedIn is how I'll do it now. I won't go through any official channel and hope that they look at their LinkedIn, but it's, you know, you can put a source at risk even before they're a source, I guess is what I'm suggesting.
And there's all sorts of, you know, new things that are coming online with governments to further identify whistleblowers. So, you know, it used to be yellow dots, but now it's you know, embedded things in even you know, electronic files that are able to do it. So you really, you know, we almost, you know, what we do now is we try to avoid any case where we mention that there's even a source involved, you know. And so we just go by documents, we just go by, you know, things. And even if there's concern about the documents, we don't even identify the document. You know, we have that if there's a lawsuit and protection, but, you know, you just have to, it's a whole new level, and it's scary. And, you know, whistleblowers get screwed almost every single time. You know, that's what the studies show. And you have to be sympathetic to that. And we only survive because these people continue doing it. And it's going to get big now in the United States. There's going to be a lot more whistleblowing that's going on in the United States. And they're going to be coming after them, you know, viciously. And we need to do everything we can.
So that'll be the last word for now. Great conversation.
Sorry.
Oh, no, great conversation. Thank you all. One more round of applause for our guests, our award winners, and I'll turn it back to Dean Lorente.
Hey, folks, thanks for coming out today. I just want to say it's easy to be depressed and despondent with some of what we heard, but I choose to listen more to what Jim just talked about because we hear it from our students. Hey, what about the source? Hey, should we be careful about this person? So I know that there's a generational change that's taking place. I wish all of you internationally, locally, at your schools, all the best. And Dana, I hope that somewhere Shindawe heard you. Please come outside and meet us, and if the winners could stay for a group photo, that would be great. There's food and drinks outside.